Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to talk about movies. I am Skye Jethani. Joining me is Josh Lindsey for the second pilot episode of the Movie Proposal podcast. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate everyone's feedback from the first episode. We're going to try to take some of that and incorporate it into this one. Josh, how are you today?
Doing great. Glad to be here, Skye.
All right. Well, the way we do these podcasts, if you didn't see the first pilot, is it's kind of a wedding theme. So we talk about something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. This week, our new segment, which we'll get to in a little bit, is a review of the Young Messiah film. So we thought we'd kind of take that movie and the theme of it and integrate it into all the segments that we're going to talk about today, or at least most of them. So let's get started. Something new, or something old, sorry. This is where we take a few minutes to talk about an old movie that we really want to recommend or suggest to our viewers for some reason. Josh, what's your something old this week?
Okay, well, we're talking about The Young Messiah, which really is an origin story.
Yeah.
I had read, someone made a comment, all good superheroes have an origin story, why not Jesus? So we're talking about The Young Messiah, it's an origin story, so I picked one of my favorite origin stories, Unbreakable.
Unbreakable, the M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Yeah, Bruce Willis, Samuel L. Jackson, Robin Wright, came out in the year 2000.
Yeah,
and
that may have been the last good M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Signs was good.
Signs was all right, yeah.
It went Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, Signs, and then it got weird after that.
And then he fell off the cliff, yeah.
But I think he's coming back. But regardless, I loved Unbreakable for a number of reasons. One, when I watch a good movie, I buy into it and I kind of dumb down and I go for a ride. I don't try and figure it out. I don't try and guess what's going on. And it's about halfway into this movie, 2/3 in the way of this movie, all of a sudden it hit me, oh my goodness, this is a superhero movie, right? And I feel embarrassed admitting that, but I loved it. It really sucked me in and I went along for the ride. And the other, two more things about it. One, it was very different. Yeah, the tone, it was dark, it was slow, it was methodical, it was more of a thriller. It wasn't big action.
Right.
He wasn't from another planet.
And this is Bruce Willis and Samuel Jackson, correct?
Correct. And Bruce Willis is just a dad who's not that much of a hero. He's got just a regular job. His marriage is not going great. He doesn't feel good about himself. In fact, he's made mistakes. He's not even that great of a guy. But it's the relationship. And this is what gets me, between the son and the father, where the son, just like most sons, see their dad as a hero, but the dad doesn't see himself as any kind of hero.
Right.
And that was very emotional to me, where I have a son, my son Quinn, he'll come up with scenarios like, Dad, if you had to fight, fill in the blank, who would win? And then I, of course, thought, well, I would win. And then he'd have to say, well, what would you do? How would you do it? And so he wants to hear that his dad is going to take care of him and be that hero, right?
And that you got a plan.
I got a plan, right? Because he kind of believes it, but he just needs some reassurance. And I saw that in this film and absolutely loved it.
All right. Well, I haven't seen that movie in a very long time. It makes me want to go back and...
You should check. I watch it out every so many years.
My something old is along the same lines, only even older. And again, going along with The Young Messiah, it's an origin movie. It's a superhero movie. And actually has a lot of messianic themes to it, taken straight from Scripture, which is the original 1978 Richard Donner Superman the movie, kind of the mother of all modern superhero films.
Yes.
This was like my movie as a kid. This totally framed my childhood. It's the Christopher Reeve, the original, and we'll get to this in a minute with The Young Messiah, but in that original Superman movie, an awful lot of the first half of the movie is a young Superman trying to figure out who he is, why he's there. It's him interacting with, not Gerald Ford, that's the president. It's Henry Ford, the actor.
Is it Henry Ford?
What's his name? His Earth father. You remember?
We'll figure it out.
Anyway, it's Ford something. It was Henry, was it Henry Fonda? No, it wasn't Henry Fonda. Anyway, it's Ford. I forget his first name. Anyway, so it's an interesting journey of self-discovery. And then they have all that Marlon Brando messianic language when he tells him, for this reason I've sent you, my only son, the light to show them the way. Because he lifted straight from the Bible by Mario Puzo, who helped write the script, who was the author of The Godfather, which is, again, why they got Marlon Brando to play Jor-El.
Yeah.
in the slate of all the new superhero movies, I don't think anyone has done an origin story as good as Richard Donner did in that original Superman movie. So go back, watch that, enjoy it. It's at a slower pace. It's definitely from a different age. The superhero costume looks like spandex on a relatively thin 6'4" man who's not huge.
Yeah.
So
Glenn Ford.
Glenn Ford. Of course, I was thinking Gerald Ford. Starts with a G.
G, yeah.
Same era. He was president right before that.
Real quick, I do want to say that movie also shaped my childhood. I had the Superman cape. I'd run around, that sort of thing. And when I played it for my son, he kept saying, "Dad, when is Superman going to fight somebody?"
Yeah.
And I kept saying, any minute.
He never does.
And he never does. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot. But yeah, fantastic film. I love watching that one every couple years.
Okay, let's move on from something old to something new. We're going to talk about a very different film from last time. Last time we talked about Zootopia, an animated feature from Disney. This time we're talking about a very small, kind of independent film, really targeting a Christian audience, and that is The Young Messiah, which I think is now out on DVD.
Yeah, it came out last week.
Or you can get it from all your different streaming services, renting it. Josh, give us a little background on the movie.
Okay, at age 7, when Jesus returns from Egypt to his home in Nazareth with his family, he discovers the truth about his life. He realizes he is the Son of God, sent by God to be the Savior of humanity.
Now, this movie was based somewhat on a novel by Anne Rice.
Correct.
And if you don't know who Anne Rice is, she's famous for the Vampire Chronicle books.
Right, which were turned into movies.
Right, with Tom Cruise as the vampire Lestat.
And Brad Pitt,
right. And
did you see those films?
I saw some of them. I don't know if I saw all of them.
Yeah, I never sat down and watched all of them.
But, going back to the novels, I did not read the first Anne Rice novel. Anne Rice, to go some more background, she grew up Catholic, walked away from the faith as an adult, and then came very aggressively back into her faith and announced that she was not going to write any more vampire books, but was going to write about the Lord. So she wrote her first novel called Christ the Lord Out of Egypt, which is based on Jesus as a child. And then she wrote a second novel, Christ the Lord, The Road to Cana, which is Jesus as a young man just prior to the beginning of his public ministry. I read the second novel, and I didn't mean to.
Did you think you were reading something else?
Well, I got a free copy of it when I was working at CT, and I had a very long trip cross-country with multiple stops, and so I was like, let's just see if it's any good. And I started reading this book on the flight, and I could not put it down.
Oh, it was great.
It was phenomenal.
Okay.
I did not read the one when he was a little boy, which this movie is based on, but what's striking about the novels, and I thought would be their downfall, is that they're written in the first person. So you're actually inside the head of Jesus as he's experiencing these different things. And I was blown away by it. And the depiction, at least in the second book, of his temptation in the wilderness was the best depiction of it I've ever read or seen anywhere. So I was really interested in this film to see how they were going to do this. Mm-hmm. Now, the way we usually run this segment, usually meaning we've done it once before.
Traditionally
speaking, is we have to make a proposal.
Correct.
Okay, so do you have a proposal for this film?
I do. Skye, I propose The Young Messiah is a wannabe prequel to The Passion of the Christ.
A wannabe prequel. Okay, all right. My proposal is that the Young Messiah really should have been a made-for-TV movie because nothing happens in it.
That is true. That was the disappointing part about it.
Yeah, and nothing happened. So let's get into yours a little bit. How in what ways do you think it's a prequel?
Well,
wants to be a prequel?
So a movie it has to be produced, and which interestingly enough, this was produced by one of the producers was Chris Columbus, who's famous for Home Alone and the first Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So his production company, 1492, produced it, which I found interesting. But they need to find a reason at this time to produce a film. Who's going to be interested in seeing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so The Passion of the Christ was such a huge success. There's just a wave that's still going on of people saying, let's make religious films. There's an audience for it, right?
And I think Mel Gibson just said he's going to make a sequel.
Correct. Yeah, he's working on it. And so I think they saw this as an opportunity, especially sequels and prequels are very popular, and this was a way to show the show Gotham is, which I don't think is very good, but is...
I've actually never seen it.
I watched 3 episodes and stopped, but the whole premise was, what would Bruce Wayne be like as a boy? And how did he turn into Batman? Not just over a couple-year period, but from the moment his parents died till adulthood. And so Those types of things are popular.
It's the young Batman.
The young Batman, yeah.
The young Dark Knight.
Yep. So these things are popular today. Here's this book. Anne Rice is successful writing books that have been turned into successful movies, and so I think they saw it as an opportunity to tell that story. It just felt. I enjoyed it. I was surprised that I enjoyed it, but it was disappointing because everything just needed to be amped up, I thought. Mm-hmm. Like you said, nothing really happened. There's not a lot of tension. The most intriguing parts for me was the relationship between Jesus and Mary. And Mary just worried the whole movie. She didn't really do a whole lot.
Yeah.
The relationship between Jesus and Satan, and it got interesting at one point, but they really didn't take it anywhere.
Right.
Satan didn't do anything except just kind of talk. But the one thing that surprised me is Joseph. Most depictions of Joseph are pretty lame. He's a background character. Right. Where he was more prominent, and I would have liked to see more of one of those relationships drawn out and some tension built. So I thought they did okay with that, but it was overall just kind of...
I didn't see anything heretical about the movie. I wouldn't say to a Christian, hey, don't watch this because it's horrible. It's not like the controversy around the last temptation of Christ, right, back in the day.
Correct, with
Scorsese? Was that a Scorsese film? So nothing like that. I think people could be trepidatious about this because obviously it's filmmakers or an author, Anne Rice, talking about events in Jesus' life that we have no record of.
Right.
Because
it's basically fiction.
All we know from the time between Jesus' birth and his public ministry is that he and his family fled to Egypt to avoid Herod, and that when he was 12 years old, he's in the temple and impressing the rabbis there, and that little scene. But other than that, there's nothing about what Jesus did from the time he was born, so roughly 30 years old when he begins his public ministry. And when you watch this movie, you begin to realize why. Because apparently the Holy Spirit inspiring the gospel writers didn't feel like there was anything that really needed to be told from this period, which is a hint that maybe you shouldn't make a movie out of this time. Right. And I think the reason why Anne Rice's novel could work, even though I didn't read it, I'm assuming it was as good as the second one, is because she tells the story from the first person point of view. You're inside Jesus' head, and so the tension and the conflict is inside of Jesus as he's interpreting his life and what's going on and what he's supposed to do. In the second book, the big tension is Jesus wondering whether or not he's supposed to take a wife. Because a Jewish man, especially a rabbi and a teacher in that time, it was expected that you marry, because the very first command of Scripture is be fruitful and multiply. So Jesus is wrestling with, does his father, his heavenly father, want him to be married or not? And comes to the conclusion, obviously, that no, he's not supposed to be married, which creates an enormous problem for his family, because to have an adult son in the household who's not married is scandalous in that time frame. So it's an internal struggle within Jesus that makes the story work. And I'm guessing that's similar in her first novel when Jesus is a boy. It's the internal mental struggle of who am I and what am I doing here and why am I different than everyone else. It's really hard to depict that in a film because you're not inside the character's head.
Right.
And so they just, nothing happens. And they introduce this Satan character who, honestly, the first time I saw him on screen, I thought it was Brad Pitt. It looked
from the vampire movie.
Yeah, he looked like a vampire from and so that was kind of weird. And I didn't think he was a very good actor, or at least the depiction of it in the film. And then the other plot point which they introduced that tried to cause some tension is they fabricate this idea that there's this Roman centurion who's played by Sean Bean, who was part of the soldiers who were ordered to slaughter all the children, all the boys in Bethlehem when they were little. But one kid got away, they find out, who of course is Jesus, and he's back now, 7, 8 years old, whatever. And he's ordered by Herod's successor, his son, to find this one boy and kill him. So there's the centurion roaming around the Judean countryside trying to find this family and this one boy so he can kill him. And that's supposed to be like the tension in the whole movie, and it just absolutely does not work. And I don't know what you felt about it, but Sean Bean is probably the only star power in this movie.
Correct.
And he looks constipated the whole time. like he just doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be in the movie. I don't know exactly why he's doing it. And then like the climax, spoiler alert, Jesus does not die at the hands of the Romans until he's 33-ish. But the climax of the movie is Jesus is in the temple in Jerusalem, and Sean Bean and a couple of other soldiers figure out that he's in there, and they go into the temple to try to find him, and then it's like the decision, are they going to kill this little boy or not? And first of all, and they did finally bring this up in the story, but Roman soldiers were absolutely forbidden from entering the temple and the temple courtyard. Like that was because they were symbols of a pagan power and pagan deities, and they literally had symbols of pagan deities, Caesar and others, on their armor, and that you could not have any of that. So there's no way they would get anywhere. One does not just walk into the temple in Jerusalem, as Sean Bean should have said, right? One does not just walk into Mordor, right? This is not how it works. So that was kind of ridiculous. But then when there is like this Indiana Jones gun sword moment where, remember in Raiders of the Lost Ark?
The crowd parts.
The crowd parts. And there's the boy Jesus on one side and Sean Bean the centurion on the other, and they just stare each other down. And then nothing happens. That's it. It's just over. And he walks away. And I'm like, what?
Well, to me, it was just another example of where they could have amped it up. That could have been an angle that they could have focused more on and created more tension and make it more interesting. And it just kind of fell flat.
Yeah.
Where they could have done a lot more with it. Where, maybe he took Jesus out of the temple and just interacting with him, he was just moved or something. Like, they could have done something more. But everything just seemed... The whole thing felt low budget to me in the writing and in the production of it. Like Satan wasn't that scary, although on a side note, my kids were very creeped out by Satan.
Oh, you watched it with your kids?
The first half. I started late. They had to go to bed. They really want to see the rest of it. But it just, it was just kind of, especially, and that's why I said it was kind of a wannabe, where when you looked at, there were a lot of similarities in The Passion of the Christ where there were flashbacks to tell more of the story. They had the Satan character, but the Satan character in Passion of the Christ was creepy.
Very. Androgynous, bald, all of that.
Right. And just taking it to a level with the baby and just like, what is this? Where this guy just, they dyed his hair blonde and had a pointy beard, right?
Right. It was a little stereotypical.
Right, and it was fine, but just didn't really take it far enough, in my opinion.
So, and it was disappointing because, like I said, in her second novel, out of Road to Cana, she depicts the temptation in the wilderness between Jesus and Satan. But the way she does it is so brilliant.
You talked about this on the podcast before.
I may have, but again, spoiler alert if you read the novel. But I was hoping it's how they were going to do it in this one. And the way she did it in that novel was Satan looks exactly like Jesus.
Yeah.
It is him, but dressed elaborately and full of wealth and power and strength. So when Jesus looks at Satan, he's seeing what he could become if he were to succumb to these temptations. And he's tempted. He's genuinely tempted. Like, this could be your life. You could have all this power and all this luxury and all this acclaim and all this comfort if you would just do what I'm asking you to do. And so it's really fascinating. But in this one, rather than a 7-year-old little English boy Jesus seeing a kind of twisted version of himself, he sees the version of Satan that we all think about.
Right.
And it just doesn't...
He was just missing the pitchfork.
Exactly. So that was boring. It didn't do anything for me. There's no real action in this. And then there's so much talking. Like, one of the tension of the movie is Jesus is trying to figure out why is he different and why do people treat him so differently, and Mary and Joseph haven't told him yet kind of the story of his birth. And so eventually, toward the end of the film, Mary sits on a blanket in an olive grove, like a picnic, with Jesus and tells him the story of his birth. And obviously it's a story pretty much anybody who sees this movie knows really well, but it's just kind of flat.
Yeah, that was the big build-up. That was the climax where, like, that was the
payoff.
Right. And you're right. It was kind of, it was sweet, but it was just kind of like, it didn't really take you anywhere.
Right. So I felt like this, to be honest, is a movie that did not need to be made. It's not based on scripture, strictly speaking. It's not really fun to watch. It doesn't didn't do anything for me anyway to kind of pull my faith forward in some fashion. It's not a particularly good movie, just as a film goes, the production value, acting. I mean, it wasn't bad. There wasn't anything about it that go, oh my gosh, this is horrible, all Christians should avoid it. But it didn't do anything for me.
Right. Overall, I would say it didn't do anything for me, but I was surprised how much I did like it. I wouldn't say it's a great film, but it was a good film, I thought. I was surprised that I liked the actor they picked for Jesus. I was convinced I wouldn't like him.
I'll give you that.
I was intrigued that my kids were intrigued. And so it was funny because I was telling my wife, Angie, we're trying to figure out what to do the next day. And I'm like, well, the kids can watch this movie. And she's like, it's beautiful outside. I'm like, they want to watch a movie about Jesus. Let's let them watch it, right? So I was, and I would disagree with you. I wanted to see this film. I wanted a film like this to be made. I'm just disappointed that was the film.
Yeah. Well, I would actually be encouraged if they made the next one, the one based on the road to Cana when Jesus is an adult. I think that was a fascinating story. It deals more with things that actually happen in Scripture. This one, it didn't do it for me. And well, there was one other piece that kind of the one other thing was going along with the stereotypical depiction of Satan. There was just a lot of cliche. I felt, and like
besides Satan.
Yeah, I mean, like Jesus standing on a mountain as a boy, holding his hands up with the sun, kind of.
Yeah.
Just those the kinds of things you expect to see on a Christian greeting card,
right,
or on the backdrop of the worship music on Sunday morning at church, like those little video backdrops of inspiring scenes of nature, like that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, it
could have been a little more gritty.
Yeah. I agree. And here's the other thing. Whenever I feel this about every period piece. If you really want to go accurate in a period piece, everyone should have really nasty teeth.
and not have a British accent?
Right. Yeah. So I think you either go all the way or you just make it a total fiction and make it a contemporary retelling of Jesus as a 6 or 7 year old boy. But that's my advice. Okay, so the question before us, Josh, is do you take this movie to be faithfully watched again?
With my children, yes. That's my disclaimer. But that's all.
You wouldn't watch it without your children?
I have no desire to see it again.
Okay. I feel the same way. I don't need to see this again. I'm not even sure I need my kids to see this. Not, again, that it would ruin their faith in any way. There's other films about Jesus or scriptural stories that I think would be more beneficial than this one.
Yeah, I want to show it as a... They want to see it, and so I want to sit down and see it with them and have a discussion.
Okay, fair enough. Something old, something new, something borrowed. Okay, Josh, you had a couple of stories that you found elsewhere on the internet this week that we're going to take a few minutes to highlight. First being?
Well, from Books and Culture, which is a division of Christianity Today.
Yes,
correct?
It is.
All right. Had an article from Alyssa Wilkinson, The Critic's Job and Why It Matters. And she spends a good chunk of the article discussing a book that was written by a critic about criticism and why it's important. That good criticism, good critics, is not the enemy of good art. In fact, it's the defender of good art. And so it's educating. It's an education on why we need critics, right? You can't have art without critics, and you can't have critics without art, right? That's, in fact, the guy who writes the book goes as far as to say, good critique is the lifeblood of good art.
And full disclosure, the guy who wrote the book that the article is based on is, of course, a critic. So.
Right. he has to eat. He's got to defend what he's doing, right?
Right.
But then what she does is she takes it from a Christian's point of view, and this is where it got really interesting for me, was that there has been a flow of Christian art, books, movie, music over the last so many years.
The marketplace seems to be generating more of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
The challenge is it's not great compared to what else is out there, generally speaking. What you see in what's available generally.
And part of the reason we're talking about this article is because we've just talked about a Christian movie.
Yeah.
And both of us felt it was rather mediocre.
Right.
So that's often the response to Christian movies is, well, as you said earlier, we put a disclaimer on it. for a Christian movie, it was...
Right. So you have to lower the bar.
Right.
And as soon as you say that, the person you're talking to knowingly nods her head. Oh, I get it. I see where we're going with this, you know?
Yeah.
And that doesn't help Christian artists make better art.
So what you're saying, or what the article is saying, Alyssa Wilkinson is saying, is that we should just be brutally honest about the quality of the art that we are seeing, whether it's produced by a Christian or not.
Yeah, I don't think she used the word brutal.
I will use the word brutally. We're here to be brutally honest.
But yeah, I mean, because that will raise the bar. There's a Christian film comes out, and as a Christian and being kind of connected in that world, you feel this, hey, there's a Christian film, you need to go buy a ticket and support it.
Right, we should support it even if it's garbage.
Right, and the question is like, well, is it any good?
Yeah.
It's like, that doesn't even come up. It's like, you need to go see this film, right? And I get, one of the... kind of I don't know if I should name names, but these guys who are making movies, were asked, like, hey, your films are making money, but the critics are slamming them.
Right.
And the response was, well, the critics don't understand what we're trying to do.
Right.
I felt that was a big cop-out, where, it's like, well, I understand what he means by that, but what the critics are saying is you're not making good art.
Right.
If it's propaganda, if it's if it's like just a lesson movie, and then you could judge it on that level. But as a film, as art, they're missing the mark,
right? And
it seems like they're missing the point.
Yeah. So here's how I tend to judge Christian movies, and I do judge them differently than non-Christian movies because I think they usually carry a different agenda. 3 qualities. First quality is just theology. Is the theology implicit in this movie accurate or is it not? And to be completely honest with you, a lot of the evangelical movies I see fail right off the bat. They just have bad theology. It's often an indirect or veiled form of health and wealth prosperity gospel. But then the second criteria I judge it on is what is the implied posture toward the culture of this film? In other words, I'm thinking of some of the God's Not Dead movies, right? There's an implied culture war in those movies of it's us against the culture.
Right. Well, the audiences they assume is going to buy immediately into the protagonist.
So does the film help us love our neighbors more? Does it help us love the world that God came to redeem more? Or is it furthering the antagonism that's at place in the culture between Christians and non-Christians? That's the second thing I judge on. And then the third one is really what this article's about, which is it any good as a film? Is it just a well-told, well-produced, well-acted story that I would watch whether or not it's a Christian movie? And my attitude is if a Christian film can get 2 of those 3 categories down, I will give it a thumbs up.
Okay.
Just 2 out of the 3. But if it only gets 1 or none, forget it.
Yeah.
And so... yeah, and maybe I'm going too light by even saying 2 out of 3. I'd love a film that gets 3 out of 3.
Well, a lot of it, I judge a film on is, when I immediately walk away, how do I feel, and do I want to see this film again?
Yeah.
But I heard real quick, just an interview. Chris Fabry's on Moody. He's got he was interviewing a Christian filmmaker and a Christian critic, and he put the critic on the spot, which I thought was fantastic. He asked the critic, hey, what do you think of this guy's new film? And I sat up in the car like, oh my goodness,
while the guy's on the line with him.
Yes. And like, talk about uncomfortable in any situation.
Right.
But in the world of Christian media, I'm like, this never happens, right? And so, and sure enough, the guy, he did a very diplomatic, well, the script and storyline was kind of contrived, and then he goes on to praise the film, and I kind of sunk in my seat. Here we go again. And so that's just the general feel that I get from the world of Christian filmmaking and Christian critics, that we're not really going to... Chris Fabry was like, hey, what'd you think? And then he wasn't completely honest.
Well, and do you think part of that is just our Christian subculture is one that says you should always be nice?
Yeah.
And I remember years ago I wrote a book, and in my book I quoted another guy's book, and I quoted it unfavorably. In other words, I took a quote from his book and I said, I think he's mistaken about this, and here's why, and I went on for it. Years go by, and I'm at a meeting with like 10, 15 Christian leaders, and this guy is one of them from who wrote this book that I disagreed with. We had a very nice meeting, very friendly, and then like 2 months later, he lives in another city. 2 months later, I get a nasty alert from somebody saying, "Hey, have you seen this guy's blog?" And I go over there, and he wrote this scathing thing about me because he said it was wrong for me to critique his book.
Oh.
And to publicly disagree. He said I should have disagreed with him in private because that's how we're supposed to.
Because you're an author?
No, because I'm a Christian.
Oh, okay.
And we're supposed to disagree with each other and rebuke someone in private.
Got it.
Matthew 18 kind of thing. And he was upset that when we met in person, I didn't say anything about how I disagreed with his book.
Oh.
But he found out about it later when he read about it. And I went, hold on, time out. The guy wrote a book. It is a public document for public consumption and public agreement or disagreement. If he had done something that I saw privately, I could have gone to him privately and say, "Hey, this is wrong," or "This is a mistake." I fully expect people, if I put something out in the public space, they have every right to quote it, to disagree with it, to argue with it, to praise it, whatever they want. But that's part of public discourse.
Right, you put it out there.
You put it out there. And same thing goes with films. If someone makes a Christian film and puts it out there, public discourse means you can publicly talk about it and agree or disagree. But I think as Christians, we have this real hesitancy to say anything negative about something a fellow Christian has said, done, or produced because we feel like, well, then I could go on about this all day. This is maybe a topic for a Phil Vischer podcast. But I've seen it again and again and again where Christians just cannot respond to criticism because they think fellow Christians should do nothing but support one another in the public, because to critique one another is somehow to divide and conquer the kingdom.
Right. Well, I mean, they are trying to, in some way, get the gospel out there or attention towards God, and so it's like, how can you knock something like that? But when you make a film or write a book, like you said, and it's out in the public, if you want better films, in fact, the article goes on to say good criticism has a lot to do with social change. And so if we really want to see social change, we need a good critique of what Christians and non-Christians are doing in the world of art.
Okay, last segment. Something blue. Now this is the segment where we talk about, really quickly, something we've seen recently that either blew our minds or that made us blow chunks. So Josh, what have you seen in media in the last, I don't know, how long has it been since we've done one of these? A week or two?
A couple, yeah. All right, so just a different slant on this. So the sequel to Independence Day just came out.
Right.
I have not seen it. I have no intention of seeing it. I was kind of glad to see it got horrible reviews because what blew chunks was the first Independence Day.
That's a hit film, though.
It was a hit film, and I hated it because halfway through the film, I started rooting for the aliens. I wanted to see them take out the human race, right? And they should have. They had everything in there. The fact that they could fly to Earth with these spaceships and
they're like the size of a city.
Right. And we can't do that, but we can figure out their technology and upload a virus and then beat the aliens. Very disappointing. I wanted to see the humans lose.
Wow.
It blew chunks. I couldn't believe they made a sequel. And so I was guilty pleasure, glad to see the new one not do so well.
All right. So you'll root for bad Christian movies, but you're not going to root for blockbuster secular movies.
Sure.
Okay, the thing that blew my mind actually this week was a while ago I heard that they were making a film about Captain Sully, what's his name? I forget his last name. The captain who flew the U.S. Airlines jet that landed in the Hudson River safely a couple of years ago and rescued 155 lives. I heard they were making a movie out of that, and I just kind of rolled my eyes, going, "Oh, great!" Another one of those movies that actually should be a made-for-TV kind of thing. But this week I saw the trailer, and it stars Tom Hanks. It's called Sully, and I was really impressed.
Yeah, I agree.
It looks fascinating, and you think. You take a 5-minute flight of an airplane that got hit by a couple of geese and the engines go out. How do you make a 2-hour movie out of that, right? But they really dug into fascinating things that happened afterwards. And I'm intrigued. I want to see the film. Trailers normally of that sort don't normally hook me. But if this movie stinks, then they should give an Oscar to the guy who made the trailer because it really hooked me and it blew my mind. So I'm super excited about seeing that.
Well, they're releasing it in Oscar time, so yeah. I think it's going to be good. I agree with you. I thought it looked fantastic, and real quick, this kind of goes back to The Young Messiah, where when you look at the movie Sully, I was like, what else can they tell? Just like you said, but now you're intrigued, right? Mm-hmm. Well, just like with the movie Noah, the Darren Aronofsky film, that was my whole thing. Like, what else can they tell me that I don't know about, right? And I was entertained in that movie. But with Young Messiah, same thing. What can they tell me that I don't know about Jesus? And they didn't tell me anything in Young Messiah, right? So, like you, I'm also intrigued by that.
All right. Well, there you go. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. Thank you for joining us on this episode. Once again, if you are a Patreon subscriber to the Phil Vischer Podcast, you have access to this episode. And we welcome your feedback. Your feedback is going to help us make these things better. As we get that feedback, as we refine this thing, we will then make a decision whether or not to make this an ongoing, regular, public podcast for everyone to have and consume. The other thing I would love to hear is, do you have suggestions of films either coming into theater or new out on DVD or streaming services that you want us to talk about or review? We like that help just as we pick what we're going to spend our time doing. And until next time, thanks for being a part of it.
Thank you.